Hello everyone and welcome to AP Biology with Mr. Jennings. Today we're going to talk about evolutionary forces. Now, to clarify some things about evolution, make sure that you understand that evolution is a population level phenomenon. That means it's the result of selection of the individual by the environment, not, and I repeat this, not just the evolution of the individual. That is a microevolutionary event, and that's not what we're talking about here. Macroevolution is really what we're looking at. We're looking at population level events, population evolution. Now, traits that are affected by evolution must be inheritable. That means no puff babies. It's a silly phrase, but the idea is that if you are a bodybuilder and jacked and shredded, like, oh yeah, that's great for you. But your little baby is not going to come out all ripped. He's going to come out like a little doughy baby, like they always are born. I know I got two of them. So, evolution is a population level phenomenon. Now, the primary force of evolution is natural selection. It's the main one. It's the one Darwin and Wallace talked about. This is the main one. So, natural selection is a selective and adaptive force, meaning it selects for a trait and allows that trait to adapt to the environment. Usually the trait is beneficial. So predation is the main one we usually like to think of. It's one of the main ones. So when we think of predation, think of stuff that allows an organism to either become a better predator or better avoiding predators. Things like camouflage, mimicry, increased speed in the water or on land, the ability of flight. All those things are all predation events. I like camouflage, so that's why I picked this owl here. This owl over here is very good at this because it blends into the background. It's going to make it hard for prey to actually see this owl coming, this vicious apex predator of the woods. Now, another organism I picked here for physiological selection. Now, this is a form of natural selection that targets the body's appendages. So really the flight thing's more here, I guess. But physiological selection is a major event where the selection acts on the body's function and structures. It targets genes that code for body parts or biochemical pathways. And I picked a fish we've already spoken about in class, the ice fish. Now, the ice fish that we see, over here, the ice fish is a unique specimen. It's not the only one of the fish in the fish classification, but it's one of the interesting ones. It is completely clear-blooded. Its blood lacks certain proteins that allows it to have a natural antifreeze property. It allows it to survive in frigid waters without its blood crystallizing within its own veins and arteries. And that's a unique, novel trait. It's so special to it. It allows it to survive in an area where no other organisms typically are found, or at least no other fish organisms. So there's a ton of options when you think about physiological selection. And humans have got this with lactase, the ability to digest lactase in Western civilizations. You got the situations of like amylase genes, all these cool things. These are all different things that are physiological. Now lastly is coevolution. Coevolution is both positive and negative in the sense of it's cooperative and antagonistic. But it's when two species are so intertwined that they reciprocally affect each other's evolution. Now, this does not mean one species directs the other's evolution. It's just one species is so adapted to another organism that it has to, basically, it's more beneficial for that organism. If it does develop a trait that allows it to co-evolve, it's going to become more beneficial. It's a highly selective pressure. What we have here is the newt. This newt species was targeted by the snake. The snake ate the newts pretty well, so one of the newts happened to mutate a toxin that made it deadly to snakes. And that lasted for thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden, a snake mutated the ability to handle the toxin. So that snake got more and more popular, that trait, and it became a situation where one side became more beneficial for a little while, then the other side caught up. It's an evolutionary arms race when one side evolves more so than the other, and the other has to play catch up. Now, coevolution does not always happen in lockstep. It's usually what happens. But you have situations like the avocado where it's co-evolved with a bird species, and that bird species went extinct. So its seeds, these gigantic things, I don't eat avocados, so I don't have an avocado eating this. The pits that are like big as this hole in my hand here. See? Those things were ate by birds and passed along long distances. When the birds went extinct, these longer seeds were pretty much useless. Well, they were able to reproduce, but not that far. They weren't able to spread their land. So, until humans came along and kind of helped carry the seed, literally, it was limited. So coevolution can leave a situation where if one species goes extinct, the other one might be left holding here, and it might go extinct. That's pretty bad. Now, another force besides natural selection is genetic drift. Now, genetic drift, I like to picture it like a highway. You're going down the highway, this is the normal gene pool, and you take an exit ramp. You're going to drift off the exit and go onto these other areas. That's genetic drift. The frequency of the population changes. So say you have like 20 cars on one road and like 4 of them are white, and all 4 of you leave to go off the off-ramp. All of a sudden it seems like all the population of cars on the new off-ramp are just 100% white cars. Well, the other ones are like blue and orange, and they're going down the rest of the interstate. So it's not really representative of the entire population. So it's a random event, not selective nor adaptive. Basically, no one's actually getting any kind of benefit. I like the meme here. So, one of the main forms of genetic drift are bottleneck events. And there's dozens of them in history that we at least know of, and there's many, many more. Anytime a large population is reduced by some sort of large, non-selective disaster, that's a bottleneck. The cheetah, it's suffered 2 bottleneck effects that we know of at the least. So much so that the population is almost genetically identical. Humans have suffered bottleneck events. That's why we think we have the lactose tolerance ability. Well, the other form, let me move this down here, of genetic drift that we talk about is founder effect. That's when, basically kind of like the original analogy I had, when those 4 white cars left the population of 10 cars, it was only originally 40% of the population. But when it traveled to the new road, it's 100% that. The gene pool is dramatically reduced. So these rare traits that you normally wouldn't see become more and more frequent because it's much more concentrated. So instead of 1 out of 1,000 individuals having an extra finger, for instance, 1 in 100, 1 in 10, those are increasing the odds that that trait can be passed on. Now, other traits become missing or lost in the genome, so certain traits could just disappear altogether. So it's anytime a new population colonizes a newly available area, and it's not representative of the larger one. Any kind of founding event, Darwin's finches, for instance. Now, gene flow is another major factor here. Gene flow is a force that is not necessarily in terms of like genetic drift or natural selection where we can measure it. It's hard to do. At the same time you leave or enter a new area, and that's immigration. You may have learned this from your human geography classes or any of your social studies. They provide new gene frequencies to the area, but they're really hard to measure because you can't really keep track of wild animals as great as you like. We have methods, but it's harder. And lastly, sexual selection. This is a really interesting one we'll talk more about in the class. But it's basically a change in genetic frequency is based on preference of the gender. It's selective change, but it can be maladaptive. And like Mr. Krabs here, these claws aren't just for attracting mates. Okay? So certain traits that are beneficial, or at least beneficial attracting mates, are passed on to the next generation.